This episode today is going to be on shooting for the very basic beginner shooter. I'm talking like they know which end of the weapon the bullet comes out of. Basic. And I don't want to sound condescending, right? Because nobody popped out of their mama with a gun in their hand. Nobody popped out of their mama shooting. Nobody did. We all learned it. Maybe I started shooting at like 7, and maybe somebody else is starting at, 37. That's okay. We all started somewhere. The Bible says, what do you have that you did not first receive? So there's that. Don't boast as like, if you know something, teach somebody else something. That's one of the big reasons I do the podcast in the first place. But sometimes I can get so caught up in the minutia and forget all the basics. And I think it's been a while. It's probably time to go back and do a basic talk on basic firearms, ammunition, ballistics. As much as I can explain some of these things in audio format. So if something's not making sense, maybe go look up a picture of it to better explain it. This may be one that you share with somebody that's new, because a lot of times if there's a different dynamic with somebody you care about or somebody you have a relationship with, family, romantic, they just don't want to listen to you. And I get that, right? Jesus, again, going to the Bible, I take all things should view all things scripturally. Jesus says a prophet has no honor in his own country. So with that being said, you might want to share this if you already know a bunch of this stuff, or maybe it's a good refresher. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. Let's get down to the basics. What is a firearm? A firearm is basically a simple machine. And if you look at it compared to like a car engine or something, it's a very simple machine, as much as people might try to overcomplicate it. It's a simple machine that contains pressure that fires a projectile in a certain direction. That's basically it. I'm not talking about legal definitions per the ATF or whatever. I'm talking about understanding it in its most basic form. If you think about basic physics, like you take a tea kettle and you boil water on a stove, same thing. You have pressure that builds up, and that tea kettle, it puts that steam out, which is the same thing, pressure, in one direction, wherever that nozzle is, wherever the whistle is on the tea kettle, right? Think about a firearm doing that same thing, but just in a much shorter amount of time. It's the same thing. You're building up gas pressure and shoving it in one direction. But instead of it happening however long it takes to boil water, let's say 20 minutes, it's doing it in a microsecond. But it's doing the same thing. It's taking a substance in one form and turning it into another form, which creates a lot of pressure, and that pressure has to go somewhere. In the form of steam, you are turning water into gas, water into water vapor, liquid water into water vapor, which needs more room, and that room has to go somewhere, so it escapes in the path of least resistance. In the form of gunpowder, you're taking a solid and turning it into a gas, which takes up much more space, which creates pressure, and that pressure has to go somewhere. In that case, out the barrel. They're doing the same thing. It just, instead of taking 20 minutes, it takes a fraction of a second. What initiates that is some form of ignition. If you talk about old school, like literal flintlocks, it's a piece of stone hitting a piece of steel and creating a spark. If you talk about modern guns, it's some kind of priming compound contained in a metallic cartridge. So you have this container. Think of it as the tea kettle, right? The container, the thing that holds all the stuff in, is the metallic cartridge. There's two real basic forms of where the priming compound is, mercury fulminate or some other chemical concoction that just turns that energy of the firing pin hitting this cartridge somewhere into that energy. It turns, potential energy into kinetic energy. The rim fire, that priming compound is found in the rim. So basically you have just a brass container, and they squirt priming compound and spin it around into the base of this container. And that's a rim fire. If you look at a rim fire, the firing pin will hit it on the rim. It fires from the rim. The fire is initiated in the rim. If you look at a center fire, what they did was they put a small hole in the back of this container, and they put a primer in it. A primer, basically just think of it as a small metal cup that houses this compound. This is by far the most common today. There are a few holdovers from the old days and cartridges that are just real small and common, like a .22 long rifle, that are still rimfire. Most of the other rimfires have went away. Most of the stuff today is center fired. Either way, some kind of firing pin hits this priming compound, and that small amount of energy gets transferred to the main charge, which is your gunpowder, your smokeless powder. And there's many different kinds of powder. There's pistol powder, there's rifle powder, there's slow burn, fast burn. Doesn't matter for today. Basically what you're doing is taking that gunpowder and igniting it, which turns it into a gas really, really quickly and creates a tremendous amount of pressure. We're talking on the rifle end like 65,000 PSI is not unheard of. So it creates a tremendous amount of pressure. Now, that cartridge, obviously, when you're firing let's back up. If you didn't have it in a firearm, you just put it on the table and hit the primer, it would just go out in every direction. That case would split wherever it was the weakest, and that pressure would just vent out into the room. Probably want to wear eye protection, but like nobody's going to have a bullet go through their chest. That's not how that works. But when you put it in a firearm, you're basically directing all that pressure in the direction that you want it to go. And in the front of that container, that cartridge, you have the projectile, the bullet. Some people will call the whole thing a bullet, but actually the whole thing is a cartridge. The bullet is the part that goes out of the barrel. The bullet is forced because of that pressure to go in one direction, because the barrel and the chamber is steel and contains all that pressure in, which forces it to go down the barrel. It goes down the barrel, and that is basically how the firearm works. And that's pretty much all firearms. Now, there's two big categories. Let's bifurcate that. Two big categories. There's handguns and there's long guns. That's pretty simple. A handgun you hold in your hand. A long gun is long. It goes against your shoulder. A shoulder-fired weapon, a long gun. And those are basically, we'll go back to the handguns, but those are basically also bifurcated into two main kinds and many different subsections, but two main ones, a shotgun and a rifle. A shotgun fires shot. If you think about when you're a kid and you pick up a handful of gravel and throw it at your buddy to hit him because he's running and you just want to throw a bunch of projectiles at him, that's basically a shotgun. Think of that gravel that you pick up and throw as shot. Now, shotguns can also fire one big projectile that's called a slug, but generally they fire shot. They're called a shotgun. They also have a smooth bore. If you look down the barrel of a shotgun, if you were to break it open, don't do it with a loaded shotgun, obviously. This is a beginner episode, but don't do that. You would just see a smooth tube. And there's going to be a lot of caveats and yeah buts. I know they make rifled shotguns, but this is for the very basic. Let's not get into, but yes, this thing exists and that thing exists. I mean, energy weapons exist, but let's talk about common stuff here. A shotgun basically has a smooth barrel. A general purpose shotgun has a smooth barrel. If you look down at it, it just looks like a tube, like a pipe. And that's basically all it is. It's a pipe so that all that shot goes down in one direction. Like we talked about, the pressure is released, it goes down the barrel in one direction, and that shot is released down the barrel. There's a lot more nuance to it, but in basic terms, that's what it does. Different size shot for different size animals. If you just think about that logically, obviously you want different size shot for a quail than you do for a goose, right? Because you're talking about a much bigger animal. But in basic terms, that's what it is. And again, one projectile, it's a slug. A rifle, on the other hand, a rifle has rifling. And that's basically just spiral grooves cut into the barrel. If you think about spinning something and making it go more stable. A real easy example of this is like a top, like the children's toy when you're a kid. If you just have a top and just put it on the table and let it go, it just falls over. But if you spin that top, it stays pointed the direction that you want it to stay pointed. And that's what rifling does. We don't have to worry about different twist rates or anything for this. That's basically what it does. It spins a bullet, and there are exceptions, but a rifle is going to fire one projectile, and it's going to fire it through that rifling, and that rifling is going to grab that bullet and spin it. And that spinning of the bullet, the fancy term is gyroscopic stabilization, but it just basically keeps it pointed in the right direction and going along a straight path. Rifles can have a much greater range than shotguns because of that fact. It allows that to be fired much more accurately than a shotgun. Now, the rifling is also used, getting back to the initial bifurcation, back to handguns. So, most modern handguns are also going to have rifling. They're just not called rifles; they're called handguns. The rifles got named for the rifling that was put in them, and that technology trickled down into the handguns. But handguns, pretty much all modern handguns are going to have rifling as well. These are bifurcated into two main categories also: revolvers and pistols, or semi-autos. But pistol is probably the correct term. Somebody might just call all handguns pistols, but technically, revolver and a pistol. A revolver is real easy to remember. It has a revolving cylinder. You probably know what I'm talking about. You've probably seen it, whether you picture an old cowboy revolver or a Dirty Harry revolver. You're talking about a revolving cylinder. It's basically a round cylinder of metal with holes drilled through it that you drop cartridges into and slide it into the firearm. And when it's empty, you slide it back out and empty them out again. It goes around in a circle, aligning each one of those holes with the barrel. So whether you cock the hammer or pull the trigger, we'll get into that later, but some mechanism aligns the round with the barrel. You fire it and you do it again, and it rotates that and aligns it again, and you fire it. The most common is going to be 6 rounds, but there are other capacities for a revolver. That's basically how a revolver works. It also throws that one projectile through the rifling, spins it, and sends it down range. Now, these are going to have fairly short range because it's limited by a couple of factors. One is the power. Basically, you're dealing with a much smaller weapon, obviously, because you're holding it in your hand. Also, you have less points of contact. You're holding it out in front of you, and you have just less points of contact. It's harder to hold it steady. So, in general, it's a shorter range weapon than a rifle is, for sure. And your other big bifurcation there is going to be your semi-autos, your modern semi-automatic handguns, or pistols. There are a bunch of different designs, but to boil it down to most modern semi-autos today, you have a magazine, which a term magazine, whether you're talking about a bunker that holds ammo, or in this case, a piece of metal with a spring that holds ammo. A magazine just is a container that holds ammo, if you wonder what that means. A reusable container that holds ammunition, a magazine. Basically, there's different designs, but they all work the same way. You basically have some kind of rectangular container with a spring inside of it that you shove rounds into, and the spring pushes them back up towards the top. When you put this in the grip of the firearm, usually most modern handguns, the grip where you hold it is hollow. You put the magazine inside, and that spring keeps those rounds shoved up to the top of the gun. On the top of the gun, you'll have what's called a slide. It's called a slide because it slides back and forth. Not real creative, but makes it handy to remember. The slide slides back and forth. When you rack the slide, when you push it back and forth, you'll put a round in the chamber the first time. After that, when you fire the round, the force of the round itself will shove the slide backwards. The projectile going forward, is a good time to cover this, I guess. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The opposite reaction is called recoil. That recoil shoves that slide backwards. It will also, if everything works correctly, it will slide it backwards, and that will leave a small gap, allowing that spring to shove another round up in its place. When it goes forward, it will grab that round and throw it into the chamber. And it will do this repeatedly until that magazine is empty. And that's basically how modern semi-automatic handguns work. Getting back to action types for the revolver, there's basically two, a single action and a double action. This can apply to some semi-autos, but it's easy to explain on the revolver. If you think of the old cowboy guns, you see them always cocking the hammer or fanning the hammer, like hitting it with their hand. That's because it's a single action revolver. The trigger only performs one action, a single action. It only drops the hammer. It does not cock the hammer. If the hammer is forward, you can pull that trigger all day long. Nothing's going to happen. The trigger only performs one action. It's a single action. So you manually, with your thumb or something else, have to pull the hammer back, and it catches, and then the trigger releases it. One action, bang, gun goes off. You have to manually cock the hammer again. For a double action, it does two things. For a double action revolver, it will bring the hammer back and send it forward. So with just the pull of the trigger, the hammer goes back and goes forward. That is a double action. And it works the same way with a semi-auto. It's just easier to explain, I think, on a revolver because most people can picture like the cowboy revolver. But a lot of modern semi-autos have hammers, and it works the same way. You've got your single action, meaning that hammer has to be cocked back. Now, the exception is when the slide moves back and forth, it's going to recock the hammer for you. But the principle is the same in that the trigger only performs one action on a single action pistol, like a 1911. The hammer must be cocked for the gun to go off. If the hammer is forward, that gun, you can pull the trigger all day long. It's never going to pull that hammer back for you. You have to do that, either by racking the slide or cocking the hammer. Right? You have to do that. It's a single action gun. And then every other time after, if the hammer is cocked, the slide is what will cock that hammer every other time. But the fact is that you pulling the trigger only drops the hammer. It's a single action. For double action guns, the action you pulling the trigger will perform two actions. It'll bring the hammer back and let it go forward. Some of these guns that will do that every time, and some of these semi-autos is called a double single action. So the hammer can do either one. It can perform either way. And in general, these are the first round, the hammer is forward and you pull the trigger and it cocks the hammer and releases it. And then every other time, it's designed so that when the slide moves back, the hammer stays back and you only do the one action from there on out and release the hammer. It's a double single action. As you may have deduced, the main thing here is that that hammer has to have enough energy to go back to what we talked about in the beginning, make that firing pin hit that primer and make the round go off. So you have to cock that with enough force. So a double action in general, a double action is going to have a much longer, heavier trigger pull, which we won't get into whether that's good or bad. It just is what it is for now. Just understand that. So in general, a double action is going to have a longer, heavier trigger pull than a single action because it's doing more things. I don't want to overload you with too much for a newbie episode. Real quick on guns. Somewhere on your gun, the barrel, the chamber, somewhere will be stamped what that gun fires. Right? So somewhere it will be marked what it fires. If it fires a 270, it will be marked 270. And then also on your cartridge, on the back of that cartridge where something hits it to make it go off, it'll also be stamped 270 Winchester. Now, it's not always that simple because many cartridges can have multiple names. The 9mm is a good one. 9mm is just a common name. 9x19, 9mm Parabellum. These are all the same cartridge. So if you're not exactly sure, like if your Glock says 9x19 because it's European, and you have a box that says 9mm, or 9 Luger is even another name for it, and you don't know, just ask, right? But you should make sure that whatever is stamped on your gun matches the ammunition. There are a lot of different other 9mm also that are not the standard 9mm, which I don't want to confuse you, but make sure that whatever is stamped on the gun is what is stamped on the ammunition. There are some exceptions. There are guns that fire different kinds of ammunition, commonly in revolvers, but again, this is basic, so we're going to keep it basic. If you're not sure, then don't do it. The juice is not worth the squeeze there. So, real basic. Make sure the ammo matches the gun. The ammunition should be stamped on the back, and the firearm should be stamped on the barrel or on the chamber as to what it fires. For a basic thing, just know that, just like if you're familiar with tools or just measurements, right? There are basically, in the modern world, two major forms of measurement. The good way, right? The English way, I'm going to call it, inches, feet, pounds, and then the communist way or the metric way, dealing in millimeters and meters and stuff like that. And I'm just kidding. But you understand that there are two main ways to measure something, right? If I need a board cut to a certain length, I can say cut it this long in feet and inches, or I can say cut it this long in meters and down to the millimeter. But I could get a board cut exactly the same size, but measure it differently. It's similar in the world of cartridges, in that you have the more traditional English form of measurement, and then you have metric. So, like we talked about, well, let's go to a real common. So, us here in America, we use the American system until we joined NATO, and then we started going off the rails and trying to make everybody happy, I guess. I don't know. But look at the 30-06. We named that because it's a 30 caliber. And we name things all kinds of crazy stuff, but just realize the 30-06. The Russians had a real similar cartridge even before us, and they named it the 7.62 by 54R. Now, I'm not going to get into the minutia about what all those different other numbers mean, but one is standard and one is metric. They're different cartridges, but there's two different ways to measure cartridges. You might find a cartridge that has a name in both, but just realize for the basic, there's two basic ways to measure it. Just like I could tell you to cut me a board 6 feet long, or I could tell you to cut it, 2 meters, 2 point whatever meters, whatever it is in metric. You understand the principle. Some other basic terms, especially here in America, usually bullets are measured in grains, which, if you're not familiar with shooting, gunpowder and bullets are generally measured in grains, which is kind of strange because we don't really measure anything else in grains, right? Even other very small units of measurement, we don't generally measure in grains. It's just a holdover, but a grain, think of like a grain of barley, just more is more, right? So that's really all you got to know for that. And you'll get an idea the more you do it, like 115 grain 9mm and 147 grain 9mm. One is going to weigh, I just in my head, 32% more than the other one, because it's 115 versus 147. So you understand that. That's really all you got to know for that. Just more is more. Shotgun is kind of opposite day, because a lot of things in shotgun are opposite. If we talk about shot size numbers, the bigger the number, the smaller the shot. And I'm not going to get into the different sizes. Just know that, right? So know that. Obviously, if I told you that, then 9-shot is much smaller than 6-shot because it's opposite. Also, gauges are the same way. They're opposite. And the way that, just real quick, that comes from the number of lead balls that are snug, fit down the barrel that equal 1 pound. And that'll make that make sense, right? So if it takes 20 lead balls of the diameter of the barrel to equal 1 pound, that's a 20 gauge. If it only takes 12, that's a 12 gauge. So obviously the 12 gauge is bigger than the 20 gauge. But just know that many things in the shotgun world are kind of opposite. Another term that's thrown around way too much, I think, today is ballistic coefficient. That's just, think of it as aerodynamics, right? How well does something fly through the air? If you're getting new, just know that's what that means, and don't even worry about the numbers on ballistics coefficient. You're not even something to concern yourself with. One other real basic concept I'm going to go over is just basic different kinds of cartridges, and there are more. I know that I know there's a semi-rimmed, okay, but let's keep it basic. I know there's a rebated rimmed, but going back to, we talked about center fire versus rim fire, and again, so it sinks in, a rim fire, the ignition is initiated in the rim, and the center fire, which is most modern cartridges, when you look in the back, you'll see a small circle. That's the primer. In the center, it's center fire. Some cartridges, we talked about the revolver, right? You drop that in the cylinder. Something has to stop that. What stops it is the rim of the cartridge. Most revolvers are designed that traditional way where the rim stops the cartridge. Many of the older cartridges also have rims, like we talked about that 7.62 by 54R. The R stands for rimmed. Way back in the day, especially on early cartridges, most of those are going to be rimmed, like 303 British, real early cartridges, because that was an easy way to manufacture, and it was an easy way to make those cartridges and make them work effectively without getting into what headspace is. But the rim that protrudes out the back, that's generally called the rim cartridge. The rim on the back sticks out farther than the rest of the cartridge. That can help grab it and pull it out. That can help it stop when you put it in the barrel or when you put it in the cylinder. But that's a rimmed cartridge. The rim sticks out farther than the rest of the cartridge. That might be kind of misleading because obviously all cartridges have a rim. Otherwise, there would be nothing for the extractor to pull the cartridge out. But the other ones are just pretty much the same diameter. That's the other real big one, like 308, 9mm. The rim is basically going to be the same diameter as the rest of the cartridge. It's not going to stick out. But if you hear the term rimmed cartridge, it basically just means that the rim sticks out farther than the main body of the cartridge. That's pretty much all I'm going to cover today. And if you are into guns, you're like, that was super basic. Good. That's kind of the point, right? It's kind of the point of this episode. So if you know somebody that doesn't know a lot about guns and maybe they don't want to ask you questions because they don't want to look silly, you just send them the episode. Or if you're trying to learn yourself, I applaud you. So it's super basic. There's a lot of other basic stuff, but if I don't want to give you so much that it's like drinking from a fire hose and you're overwhelmed. Especially if you're brand new, you might want to go back and listen to this a couple of times. But especially if you have somebody that you know and you care about, that you want to get into guns, maybe they'll be more apt to get into it if they're less intimidated, if they know what some of this stuff is, if they know how it works. So anyway, with that, no tactical tip of the day for this episode. I don't think it's in keeping with the body of the episode, but the tactical verse of the day. Now, if you listen a lot, you've probably heard me say many times this verse, but if you're new, you probably haven't. Psalm 144. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Remember, it's all a gift from God. The fact that you exist is a gift from God. Whatever strength you have, whatever talents, skills, abilities you have, what do you have that you did not first receive? Right? Those were all gifts from God. You wouldn't have them if God didn't give them to you. So give God the glory. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Thank you for listening, and have a blessed day.